Hi everyone. I am delighted to be joined today for a podcast conversation with Amy Rosso, who is a ex or previous corporate leader, CEO turned grief conscious coach, now working in helping organizations and individuals to be able to navigate that grief process in the workplace in particular, of course, both for themselves and for their team members. A conversation that I certainly don't feel happens an awful lot. And Amy and I were just talking before we hit record here that, whatever comes out of our conversation today is worthwhile because it shines a light on a conversation that, as I say, doesn't happen too often, and a topic that certainly, I would say, from my experience within the workplace, is a conversation that, in my 17 years in corporate, we weren't having all too often, and not because grief wasn't happening or loss wasn't happening, but we just probably weren't really kind of bringing it to the forefront and understanding what we can do to be able to support our individuals. So, Amy, thank you so much for giving your time today and coming in and sharing more about your story and what you do to, like we say, shine a light on this topic. It's really appreciated.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me, and thank you for opening the opportunity to be part of this.
Great, no problem at all. And can you remind me, Amy, you on the Sunshine Coast?
I am, yes,
Yes.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
I'm over here in Perth. Maybe that's part of, we were just saying before we started recording as well. I was like, Amy's colour versus my colour is sort of highlighting just how pale I look right now. And it's not just because of my cold. I think it's just the skin colour, but maybe that adds up, right? You're sitting on the Sunshine Coast, I'm over here in Perth. As much as we get great weather, but of course, you get it probably far more consistently than what we do. So maybe that's your trick too.
Also, when you holiday on a beautiful island, that I always call that my stratty tan, and that's a bit of a little treat that you get along the way with your beach walks and sun time, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
Straddy time being Stradbroke Island, I'm assuming.
Yes, that's right.
I haven't been, but I've got friends over there, and yeah, familiar with it to a certain degree. I'm sure I'll get there one day. But Amy, I guess what I would love to do to start our conversation is perhaps to help everyone listening understand a little bit more around your journey. I've said corporate leader, CEO, turned grief conscious coach and speaker. What sort of, it's quite a shift, right? So what's caused all of that, or what led you to doing the work that you do now?
Yeah, well, I suppose for me is I was 22 when I lost my mum, and returning to work and into that, corporate space of, at the time I was a personal assistant to the director of the company. And from there it was almost like grief wasn't spoken about. It was, silence. And I think when you put on a corporate hat or you're in a corporate role, is that it's a it's a space of where grief is silenced, and you return to work and it's almost like you have to put this mask on of bravery and courage, and keep swapping hats between grieving when you're able to, or finding that time, to then being at work and having this solid front is the journey. So from that point is I stepped into, I've had a couple of roles along my journey, from client relationship manager to team leader, and finishing with the previous company I worked for as the CEO. And I was, fortunate to obviously be open to personal growth and career growth through different, opportunities within leadership. And but when I reflected on that, on that journey from when I lost mum to, now starting my coaching business, there was always a bit of a shift and a gap in everything was spoken about with critical drivers and outcomes for the business, and which is important. But also when you've got a team member or you're a leader yourself, is how do you navigate that journey of grief when it is, confronted within the workplace. So that's why I'm on this journey now.
Okay, yeah. So your own experience of loss, 22 in the
Yeah.
workplace, and so your experience of that was that it was almost like there were two versions of you almost. You know, the Amy
Yeah.
that was grieving, and then the Amy that showed up to work and got the job done.
Yeah.
And am I right to say you there was this feeling of almost you didn't feel like you could bring that grief to
Yeah.
work? Is that fair? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And returning to work, it was difficult as well. There was conversations that were, being had, and you were like, am I, overthinking things? Or, the phone would ring and that could be a trigger of, the machines going off in the hospital, for example. Like, there's all these things that are just not considered, when we return to work. And maybe it's the unknown as well, from there. And even prior to losing mum, people, have this perspective that grief starts when you lose somebody, but it's actually prior to that, depending on how you're losing them. So, for example, my mum had cancer, and the grief started when we found the news, when we were like, oh, she's got cancer. And that's when the grief, kind of started to kick into another level. And even prior to that, the unknown of, being transferred from one hospital to another, it was
Mm.
like, oh, my mum had always survived hospital trips and surgeries. And then all of a sudden it was like, no, this is a different visit to the hospital. This is something that is a bit more serious. It was unplanned.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think, awareness around when grief can begin. And
Mm.
secondly, how do we navigate that in the workplace for our team, but also the support to give them as well, through that transition of grief and returning to work, carrying that heaviness and, noise in our heads, and just being aware of it, I think is really important.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that awareness, is that a dog? Is that your dog? Yeah.
It is, yes, yes.
What is that strange noise? Like, that sounds like
Yeah,
a dog, but that's so fun. It could have
yeah.
been trying to escape or something. I'm so jealous.
He's an attention seeker.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, wants to be part. Well, invite him on. Why not? um, but okay, so there's this for you then. The work that you're doing is helping leaders and individuals to be able to understand more about that process so that they can best support and not achieve the business needs and outcomes and the KPIs and all those pieces, but actually work with it rather than kind of
Yeah,
shy away from it, I guess, is probably what was happening when you were going through it. And certainly I'm sure for many others as well, it's perhaps, I mean, we would see it all the time, if we don't know how to deal with something, often we bury the head in the sands and just kind of, I'm sure that it'll go away in time. And it's quite a common human trait or behavior for people to do, right? And I would
yeah,
say that with judgment, it's like I would have done that. I can't think of a live example, but like, sure, I would have done that in my life, absolutely. Like, oh, I don't know what to do, so I won't. And so if you by your work can help people to understand more about it, clarify anything in terms of what actually is going on and how they can best support, I think it's, yeah, really critical and insightful, powerful work. Because once we're equipped with the tools, with the insights to be able to do it, generally speaking, we're more confident to actually take our heads out of the sand and take action, right?
yeah, absolutely. And for me too is, my journey hasn't always been, easy to talk about either. Some things that, I can talk about it, without getting emotional and upset. And then other times it's like, holy moly, like, and you can feel that emotion. But in saying that is, even though it hasn't been easy to share, I still think, it's a need, to be spoken about when we are, in corporate positions, or, whether we're going through the grief ourselves, or secondly to that, when team members go through it, is they return to work, and, where we have this front of, okay, we're back at work, and then team members and leaders can think, okay, well then that's okay, they're settling in, and we can have a conversation about, how are you going, but then how do we dig deeper to be like, are they actually going okay? Are they actually coping? Are they needing some space to to navigate that transition or with their workload? Is there, what ways can we support them opposed to, them having to think about
Mm.
how can, like, what support do I need? How can we literally just have a conversation with a team member and say, this is what if you're willing to, we're happy to implement some changes and take some pressure off you for a time being, opposed to it being, you know, the end of quarter or end of month review comes and it's, you know, things are not delivered on time because there has been this distraction called grief, and grief can trigger at any time,
Mm.
whether it's an email. I remember being at work one day and, and I was sending this email to a person, one of our clients, and her name was Pauline. And it was like, as I was typing, "Hi, Pauline," I'm like, holy moly, it's an uncommon name, but that was actually my mum's name. So,
Mm.
you know, and it was like, oh, I just need to take a step back and give myself some time to process that and then step back into it. And and I think just having that awareness and support. And with leaders, I've had, some really great conversations with business coaches and leadership coaches this last, probably like 4 to 6 weeks of having these conversations around, grief in workplaces. And they said, I think it's a really fantastic idea that you're bringing one awareness to it, but also offering the services to help leaders in their positions, but also their team when they go through, trauma, loss, grief, and how do we navigate that?
Yeah.
And, they're saying a lot of people will be like, oh, we don't want to talk about grief, but for me, it's a level of, my position comes from a level of understanding, the compassionate side of it, which we all need, and also wanting to nurture, the well-being of people so they can navigate in a, not so much a positive space, but, in an environment where they're understood and they can be given tools to step into,
Mm.
different roles and different transitions that happen after loss.
Yeah, yeah. I love what you say there. If I sort of summarize it, it's almost like I hear it as this the leaders or the team, the organization being more proactive with what they can do to support, to offer, rather than just reacting to either what the person's telling them or what maybe they
Mm.
assume because so and so walked in today and they look great, they look fine, they look happy, wow, amazing,
Yes,
they must
yeah,
be over it then, right?
yeah,
Versus
yeah,
actually having the level of awareness that understands that, as you said, could be an email, could be whatever, that grief is a cycle, it's going to come back, it's going to be that roller coaster, and being more proactive to be able to provide and offer different
yeah,
support that, I mean, let's be real. I'm sure an individual going through grief, if you were to say to them, "What do you need? How can we help?" I mean, maybe they don't even know themselves at that point. They can't think clearly enough. They don't know yet.
yeah,
Need more time, whatever. So, actually, an organisation volunteering some options with your guidance, from having gone through it, um,
mm,
you can see how that arguably would be far more supportive. Um,
yeah. And I think too, when we do have loss, is that people will always say, what can I do to help you? But just having that, that extra, thought pattern of thinking, well, what can I do to help them without them having to think about, oh, I've just had this loss and now they're asking me, how can I support you? And it makes them have to think about something else. So if we can come from a place of, hey, this is, what we're going to do to help you through it, and then they can say yes or no, or, they can give some feedback opposed to having to have that headspace of thinking when there's already so much, fog and noise and shadow in there that, if we're supported, then it's a very different level of, okay, I feel support now. And and I think for leaders as well, Laura, is it's a thing of, and I had an interesting conversation with a coach around, vulnerability in leadership. And I said, I actually find, vulnerability to be a courage opposed to, a weakness. And anyway, it's not, about, who's right or wrong. It's really about, environment and, the place that you work. But a lot, the feedback is that sometimes vulnerability in leadership positions can be used against you as well. And I just find, with more awareness around it and more understanding and more tools around it, then maybe we can eliminate that particular space, and leaders can have that, that bravery, I suppose, to be vulnerable, share that they've, got some noise going on in their head today. It might not be there tomorrow, but for right now, this is how I'm feeling.
Mm.
And, I remember stepping into, like some of my positions, and I was like, oh, do I have to have that courage to be that front? But the other side of it was, when the team are allowed to know what's going on, it's almost, they want to know that you're okay too. So it opens up, well, it encourages that, that they're allowed to be vulnerable as well, opposed to coming to work and putting on this bravery. And I, and it's not just even around grief, Laura. It can be around, relationship breakup, separation with divorce, and all of those different emotions that can come into workplaces when you're leading a team or when you're part of a team.
Mhm.
But that's a whole nother kind of topic, I
Yeah.
suppose. But
Yeah.
sticking to grief is, it's I think it's just, it's, if you can lead with courage, you don't silence the grief in the environment, which then leads to other people feeling that they can be vulnerable, and there's more connection in the workplace as well, opposed to this barrier of silence. And I think that that's really important.
So important. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And of course, I mean, vulnerability, sure, could be used against somebody, could be used against any of us in any position. But
Yeah.
it is critical to building trust, and it's critical to building strong relationships. And
Yeah.
when I think about, for me, my version, my interpretation of contagious leadership, that would be a huge part of it, right? It's thinking around, well, what environment is the leader setting and creating that's building that trust, being truly authentic, to be able to show
Yes.
others what's possible and show others that they can do it too, and it's okay. It's not going to be held against them. It's not going to come back to bite them and say, well, you can get the promotion because you told me you were grieving. I mean,
Yeah.
like, if we bring it on, if we put it all on the table and we're working with the individual,
Yeah.
then again, much stronger relationship, much better, based on trust, built on trust, and it's going to arguably sustain and retain that person far longer than
Yeah.
if we, try and close it out otherwise. I just want to come back to something that you said before. Yeah, this whole idea around, I was coming to me as you were sharing more around, talking more on it. This idea of being proactive with the people, and individuals going through this, and rather than relying wholly on them to be able to come up with it. As we've said, I think it's super important. But I imagine it's got to be like anything, finding that balance of not just assuming this is what they need, or not just telling them this is what they need. You gotta, and you said it, you gotta give them that choice,
Mm.
because
Yeah,
otherwise you're
absolutely.
assuming, right? And I mean, grief, particularly a loss of that kind, a parent, a loved one, a family member, whoever it is that's close to you, for the most part, that's going to hit people hard. But my goodness, I'm sure there are plenty of examples around the world where it doesn't hit hard, and it's maybe a good thing for, who knows? And so we can't go in assuming. But if we're
Yeah.
proactive and then we give them the choice, I think, like you said, that's, to me, that's the magic, right? That's where it's going to be much more empowering to the individual, supportive and empowering to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, with grief in workplaces is it's a topic that people don't want to talk about.
Hmm.
And when it is spoken about, you can see people, come together and they do those check-ins, and then also, returning to work in that first, year to 2 years, and it can extend even longer than that. But the first year, they say is probably one of the most difficult because it's the first of everything. It's the anniversary of, the loss. It's, the birthdays and the Christmases and Easter and Mother's Day and Father's Day and all of those, anniversary or celebrations, I suppose. that you're then setting up to, there's a person missing here, or, and from there is how do we prepare or how do we support, or and I think also if leaders can support their team through it, and if they're not prepared to have the conversation, and what I mean by the conversation is, to have those check-ins and provide support, then outsource it, because a lot of companies will have, a business coach, for example, and, yes, that is needed for your business, but on the other side of it is, if we can support our team, then it reduces the cost to the business with productivity, and also with sick leave being paid out. If they can take half a day off work and have a coaching session to navigate their grief, then on the other side of it, it's a win-win almost for the team, and also for the costings of the business as well. And I think when that's taken into account is, and support, if you're able to, if you feel supported in the team, you do have that extra, step in your to return and deliver great results. But when you're not, in that headspace of, am I sitting at my computer and, twiddling my thumbs, not intentionally, but, because I literally can't write this email, I can't respond to something, or, like I said earlier, the phone ringing, is that, triggering some emotions, or, a song being played in the workplace, is that triggering something as well? So there's a lot of things that you think, okay, I'm okay, until it happens, and then you're like, holy moly. And I will, also admit, I remember being at work one day, and it was, way too much for me. And I had one person standing on the left of me and one person standing on the right. And I just remember in that moment all of that noise, and I was like, holy moly. And I literally stormed out of the office. I was like, I just need some, some fresh air and some space, and just, to breathe. I just felt so, constricted in that moment. And it was actually because it was a trigger from being in hospital and having all those people around me with, noise and voices and all of those things that happen. I literally just couldn't hold it in. So for me, I was like, I need to get out. I need to get out and get some fresh air, and have a and just have a breath, like,
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And no, kind of on that, what are some things that you think as individuals they can do, or advice maybe that you would give individuals if they're navigating grief and still, going to work? What advice would you give them? Like, what can they maybe be doing to best support themselves?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's a bit of a two space, answer. There is one, if you're the leader trying, navigating grief and returning to work, um, is having the tools. So, like, what do you need? And if you're a leader supporting a team member through it, it's just having those regular check-ins, and it doesn't have to be, a long conversation. It can literally be, hey, I'm just checking in to see how you're going. And then they might respond and say, yeah, I'm good, like, I've just got XYZ on today. But then if you just dig that little bit deeper and say, no, I'm actually, how are you actually going? And depending on your relationship with them, is that they will open up. They will open up and start having, a flowing conversation. And I think that, it's almost like letting the balloon out, it's, oh, I'm safe. I'm okay. I've got this, you know, I can actually share how I'm feeling. And the other side, in the leadership, space, when you're navigating it, is, really reflecting on, what do you need? What do you need in order to lead the team? Do you need to take a step back for, a couple of weeks, or do you need to share with the team that this is what's going on, and navigate that space? Um, yeah, so I think, holding space is the most important thing.
Yeah.
But if you're going to hold that space, it's come from a place of empathy and compassion, because there's also, there's also this thing that we listen to respond opposed to we listen to understand. And I think that that's one of the big differences is, we can respond to say, yeah, I'm going good, but you also can listen to the tone of that response and find some little hidden things in there as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Practicing for an individual helping or supporting somebody else going through it, really listening to understand, listening
Yeah,
to actively listening and not just taking it as verbatim, the tone, the time, all of those pieces that they can be taking into account. Okay, so advice from you to an individual going through it and a leader helping somebody to go through it. First and foremost, you're saying it's the consistency, the regular check-ins, doesn't have to be overly complicated, just asking them how are you going, listening
yeah,
actively, and in an individual to be asking themselves, what do I need? What do I most need today, this week, or what have you. Is there anything else, Amy, that either worked for you when you were navigating it or that you've seen with others or clients that you've worked with that has been particularly helpful or supportive? I know because it's going to be so different for
yeah,
everybody, like we say, but
yeah.
perhaps there's common things that people might want to think about.
I think the most important thing is not to be too hard on yourself when you have gone through loss. There's a big, I suppose, um, step in shifting your identity. So, the future that you thought that you were going to have, who you are right now when you are in that grief, that, the messy middle, I suppose you could say. And then also is who do you want to be in the identity, shift of that journey? Secondly, I will add is environment. I think environment is one of the most biggest um, shifts that you need to consider. For myself is that if I, you know, was feeling vulnerable, I would know what was going to, either be a trigger or I'd pull myself out of it. And when I say pull myself out of it, either ring somebody or, have that connection opposed to sitting there thinking nobody understands. And, you can have conversations where some people may not understand, but the other side of it, at least you've been able to release. And that's really important. And thirdly, I think is, your beliefs and values. So, if we're sitting in a place of, feeling less worth, the other side of it is trying to shift that belief. So, an example for, that I probably learned from a very young age is the meaning that you give to something. So, and in coaching is that it's always this space of nothing has meaning except for the meaning that you give to it. And for me, in a young age, and I share this with you, Laura, because it's really a unique space with using the word sexy in your branding, and that's got obviously a bit of I suppose not so much it's the meaning that you give to it. So for me is that my mum had a sign in the kitchen when we were younger and it used to say, I'm a bitch, but it wasn't in a negative way or a nasty way. It was, I'm a bitch. So the B was for beautiful, the I was for intelligent, and the T was for talented, the C was for charming, and the H was for happy. So when you're able to shift a meaning to something or, shift your emotion, I think that that's really, really, really important. So leading into, the branding with Ignite Your Sexy is that, the S was for your self-worth after loss. And then expressing the E and X, expressing without apologizing, and then the Y being you. This is you can reclaim your life. You can navigate this journey, and sometimes we just need to have that right support and network around us. And when I talk about, expressing is that we always find ourselves, and not just in grief, it can be, in other areas, other partnerships in life, is that we always can find ourselves saying, I'm sorry, but, and I think if we can just be able to express and come from a place of this is how I'm feeling, without saying, I'm sorry that I'm feeling this way, or going and having a conversation with, your leaders at work and saying, hey, look, I'm really sorry I'm feeling this way, but I need to take the day off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's validation in your emotion, and I think that that's really important. And when we can seek that validation from ourselves opposed to seeking it from somebody else, it can be a really big shift that, what, I'm actually putting myself first. And I
Yes,
think that
yes.
that's really important when you navigate that messy middle of who I was to who I am to who I want to become as well.
Yeah, yeah, like you say, around that identity piece, just
Yeah,
yeah, it's such a
absolutely.
shift. Who am I now? Who do I want to be? And then are you saying it's like that? Who do I want to be? Being then help the individual to then work towards that when they're making
Yeah,
their choices, when
yeah,
they're asking for the support that they might need or want on any given day. All of these pieces that are going to help them to compound into, I'm going to say, the new identity, right? Which is the reality when
yeah.
somebody's gone through a loss of any kind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just to add to that too is it's a it's a big it is a big shift in life, and it doesn't matter what age you are either. We I remember several times, people would say to me, I don't know what I would do without my mum, or, if I had a lost my mum, or, and it was all of this, language. And I'm like, I didn't choose to walk this path. I didn't choose to lose my mum at the age of 22. But when I look back on it now, it's almost, my own journey of now being able to take my pain and turn it into a purpose, and now
Mm.
changing that purpose into a passion. And it doesn't have to be, which is the purpose of a heart-led coach. It's coming from the heart and it's leading from there. And I think the other side of it too is when you're able to have conversations that have got a level of understanding and integrity, but also direction. It's a really it can be the right the right journey for you, opposed to holding on to it. And I think if you bottle your emotions, um, it can have some really serious impact on, your nervous system and your healing, your healing journey, and how it prolongs it. And that's really important in the in that messy middle, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And giving yourself that compassion, like you said before, when you're navigating that cycle and being kind to
Yeah.
yourself, as I don't know, corny or as cheesy as that sounds, and giving yourself that time, because it does take time, and
Mm,
communicating as best as possible what you actually do need from your leaders, from your work environment, other people around you, to be able to get the support and not do it alone. For those that
yeah.
don't want to do it alone, I'm sure there's people that do and that can and want to, maybe, right? Everyone's different. But for leaders,
Mm.
helping themselves and individuals, then making sure that the communication is there. And they
Yeah,
know
absolutely. Yeah.
ours, right? I think back to this morning, even I was having a conversation with a client, nothing to do with grief. What we were talking about, changing processes in her team and organization, so something completely different. But lo
Yeah.
and behold, it comes down to the three key things I always talk around: relationships, communication, and confidence. Relationships, communication, and confidence. Generally speaking,
Yeah.
most things can be solved if we kind of lift the lid on those three key areas. And so here, absolutely making sure that you're surrounded by the right people, you've got the right relationships in place to support, and you're communicating consistently, so you're not trying to do it alone. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not
Yeah.
easy. Not easy. And as we said at the start, a conversation though that, I think kudos to you, Amy, for um, acknowledging that, the loss that you had at age 22, you're now whatever you are, however many years later, and you using that story and that journey that you've had and that experience and now wisdom to be able to help and support and guide other people. And that's your real purpose, that's your real passion. Ignite your sexy, is that right? Ignite your sexy.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
I remember when we first spoke, I was like, hey, hold on, help me understand, like, how does ignite your sexy, how is Ignite Your Sexy a brand for grief coaching? I'm not seeing this. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that backstory too, because like you say, everything's got a meaning. The only meaning that it has is the meaning that we put on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
it can be hard for people to accept that. I find, that there
Mm,
may be things are a certain way because of the meaning they have chosen consciously or subconsciously to put on something, or things are the way they are because of the choices that they consciously or subconsciously have actually chosen to take or make in life. Not always easy
yeah.
to hear, but there's so much truth behind it when we're honest with ourselves, fair to say. So thank you for
Mm.
bringing that in. And Amy, anything else that you would say before we start to wrap up our conversation is, I don't know, advice to an individual, leaders, organizations, anything else that you think is really important or that you want to bring into the conversation that we
Yeah.
haven't covered?
I think it's really important to just know that you're not alone. You're not alone through this journey, that there is help out there, whether it is going through some counseling and some therapy, or whether it is, reaching out to the likes of myself with the coaching, to move you from A to B, or, people, in the grief stages for myself, I remember people be like, oh, you'll move on, like, and you hear that, and I'm like, it's not about moving on, it's about moving through. And I think that that's, if we're able to create a space of where we can first not be too hard on ourselves, know that there is support out there, and also is, just being kind to yourself. We're already so hard on ourselves in, day-to-day life, but when you're carrying this extra weight of grief, it can be a little bit hard to see. But that's where I, go from the shadows to shine in, in the journey, is that grief is, it's a dark kind of place, but as we move through, is that we shine our light, and we can all have that if we want it.
Yeah, yeah, nicely said, beautifully said. Shadows to shine. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
and no
you.
wonder that you've got this radiating glow about you because that's your whole thing. That's what you're doing. That's what you're helping people with day in, day out. So yeah, kudos to you again, Amy, for the work that you're doing and shining a light on it, quite literally, to help
Yeah,
people to navigate it. And rather than, like we said earlier, put their head in the sand and shy away from it, because for real, it is an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people.
yeah.
And if we can equip them with the work that you're doing, then fantastic. So, Amy, on that note, if listeners want to learn more about the work that you do, follow along with you, get in touch with you around support for themselves or for their teams or organizations, how can they best contact with you? Where are you hanging out?
Yeah. So, based on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, but secondly to that is, because it's online coaching, is that I can service. I was going to say Australia-wide, but it's, it's a global, I suppose, opportunity for everybody. So company, on Instagram and Facebook is Ignite Your Sexy, or I do have a business page called Amy Rosso that you can find me there as well.
Great.
And my
Yes.
website, igniteyoursexy.com. And there's, book a call on there, whether you are an individual going through loss, or whether, it's leadership stuff that's also needed as well. So happy to help out.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, and a call. I always think, what's the harm if even just in exploring what that could look like? Again, whether it's for yourself, whether it's for your team, upskilling your leader cohort, whatever it might be. Then
Mm,
those calls. I'm assuming you're the same. They're not. Well, once we hang up this phone call, you'll be locked into this, that, and the other. It's an exploration to be able to understand more and learn and take that away and digest and process. So yeah, that's cool that you offer that time for people to do that as well. So Amy, again, thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you
your,
so
your
much for
story.
having me, Laura. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Alrighty, we will leave it there for today. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back soon.